that is central to much of nature. I don't know how many of you will recognize this picture. It's basically millions of birds, little birds called starlings. And sometimes during summer, they go up into the sky and they form these beautiful patterns. Now, the question is, well, lots of questions. What's the pattern for? We don't quite know the answer. We know maybe it has to do with protecting themselves from hawks. But then why should they make so many different patterns? Why not the same thing over and over again? The patterns also keep changing with time. But the most important question of all is, how do they know how to make that pattern? How does any one bird inside that pattern know which way to fly? Is it only looking at its neighbors, or is it doing something else? Does it have a pattern inside its head? We don't know. If it does, how does it know where in the pattern it fits? We don't know. All we know is that one bird in that flock can only see about 5 or 6 birds around it. That's all. Is there a manager? No. Is there a director? Is there a designer? No. So what does it mean? It flies in the face of everything that we know about creation. That you can form something beautiful without a designer, without a manager, without any construction techniques, just by itself. And it seems to be nature's way. Incidentally, I just saw a picture which I didn't bring because it's not a very happy picture. This kind of behavior is also seen inside the human body with certain kinds of cells which kind of get together and start forming patterns. Except what happens is that those patterns are not like the patterns of these birds. They are tumors. Okay? So it's strange to think that this beautiful pattern of bird flight is also the dance of the tumor inside the body. So we know very little about it. It has a great name, this behavior of birds. It's called murmuration. And so what is it? It's that if I send a tweet and it's read by 300 people, then the 300 people's tweeting changes just that little bit because they just saw my tweet. And just that little change that it causes in their tweets comes back and affects me. So it's a system where every bit of the system is affecting every other bit of the system. Something like that is making the birds form these murmuration patterns. If you agree with that, then what you will be forced to agree with actually is that because of the internet, the human race is murmurating. A murmurating bird can't sense the pattern, so you can't sense the pattern. It's only something from the outside, if it watches, will see the patterns. Okay? Very strange. But back to our profession, what does it mean? In science, we have a name for this. It's called spontaneous order. And it's there in nature everywhere. Order which appears without design, without engineering, without fabrication, without architecture. Spontaneous order. The difference between a coconut tree and an office building. The office building is not spontaneous order at all. It's completely designed. The coconut tree just happens, but it's equally tall and it will probably outlive the building. Okay, so that's spontaneous order. So what does it mean with you and the children of today? The generation where much of what I said has already happened. They all have their smartphones. They don't understand why you take away the smartphone when they come into school and give it back to them after school finishes. They don't understand why they have exams. This I've heard from a 16-year-old in England. Quite politely, he said. He was showing me the example of a GCSE question. Showed me the question and he said, this is the kind of question we get. So I said, so he says, no, it's fine. I don't mind them asking the question, but why did they take away my phone? Okay, they genuinely don't understand why. Because they see their parents, their friends out in the road, everybody's got their phones. If you ask them a question, they pull out the phone. But on that one day during the exam, you push them back into the 18th century and say, now you perform. So there is a confusion in their mind, quite rightly so. So what should you do as a teacher? Well, we started out by saying unidirectional instruction. That was the Victorian model. I will tell you, you will listen. Don't talk to each other, just listen. Memorize the facts and I will examine. Then came the next step where we said, no, this is very harsh. This is not really very nice. What about if we also let them ask questions? That was a big deal of the early 20th century. Students will be allowed to ask questions. So at the end of the class, is there any questions? And you know what happens after that. You get a couple of people raising their hands and you get all sorts of responses. I won't tell you because you're all teachers here, but in my school I used to get typical responses like, don't think you're very clever, sit down. Which means that the teacher didn't have any clue what the answer was. Okay. So then we changed from that to saying discovery learning. Why don't we let them discover? Except that they must only discover whatever we want them to discover. And they must use the methods of discovery which we tell them. Okay. So we went with this discovery for some time and then we said they're not engaging. Why should they engage? If you're saying do it this way, use this material. So then we shifted further to saying now we are going to be, as teachers, we are going to be the guides. We will help them from the side, etc. Except that we still didn't realize that those are top-down hierarchical words. A guide is a little bit more than the guided. The helper is a little bit more than the helped. So we still maintained our hierarchy. I'm saying we got to give up that last bit now. You let them go into the internet, which, forget my generation, even yours, understands really little of. So if you let them go into that, all that you can say is, you go there, I'll come with you. That's about it. So the role is that of a kind of a friend who says, hey, be careful, be careful. Okay, go, that way. What else can we do? Because look at the education system itself right now. I'm sure there are many people here in this room who use WhatsApp. But if I were to ask you, do you know how WhatsApp works? I wonder how many people know how WhatsApp works, what actually happens to the message. Well, as I was expecting it. On the other hand, if I were to ask you, how does a steam engine work? I would get a lot of hands. Piston, steam, pressure, you remember all that? So, what is the purpose of an education system where the children will get out of school not knowing how WhatsApp works, but knowing how a steam engine does? Surely there's something wrong there. How does the internet work? What is it? We don't have that anywhere. So in 2009 I started this process called the Granny Cloud because remember my system depended on the fact that you have to raise an interesting question. Now in schools such as yours there's no problem, you will do that. In England I was doing that with the children. But what about the areas which are so remote when you don't have anyone to raise the question, to raise a good quality question. So I wrote for volunteers in the Guardian newspaper saying that, if you have time and if you're interested in children, can you give me 1 hour of your time every week for free? You don't have to go anywhere, just go on Skype. And use the method of the grandmother. So there was of course a lot of query about what does that mean. So actually what it means is, if you think back at your childhood, your parents and your teachers use discipline as their method. You've got to work harder, you've got to practice your math, you really should be preparing for your exam, etc. But the grandmother does not. The grandmother says, how does that robot thing work? And the child shows, oh, don't you know this? This is very simple. And the grandmother says, oh, I didn't know that. You're very clever. When I was your age, I could have never understood this. And the child says, that's nothing. I'll show you something more. It's a different method. Okay. So I called it the method of the grandmother, which uses admiration rather than discipline as its pedagogical force. The name caught on, and the group of volunteers that formed as a result of my appeal was called the Granny Cloud. Okay, they're actually men and women of all ages, but the name has stuck and they're all called grannies because they use the method of the grandmother.